Sometimes the news is something that is not what you'd like to hear. Some of it is what you would like to hear. We'd like to have something a little along the more solution-type oriented message now. William Henry comes to us from Nashville, Tennessee. As was listed on your update sheets, he wasn't confirmed at the time of the conference, but is now. And his message is one that I'm sure will be of interest to you. He might not want me to say this, but what I've heard is that one of the things that Zechariah Sitchin has spoken is that he's rather jealous of this man and the man you're about to hear. And some of you are aware of him and his speaking around the country. But it is, his message, I believe, goes on beyond that, and it's a pleasure to introduce him to you this morning. And now you can bring him on and warm up the room some more with some applause for William Henry, please.
Thank you, Dean, very much. Can everybody hear me okay? I want to first say thank you, Dean, for having me out here and for putting this on. This has been a wonderful experience for me, meeting a lot of people, heroes. Zechariah Sitchin, of course, is one of my heroes, and it was a distinct pleasure that I had to meet him and to present some of my concepts and ideas to him and his friends, and it was very nice to have them as well received as they were. My message to you today is that there is a peacemaker. Every Sunday in churches across the world, people talk about the second coming. But what they leave out is that this Christ or Messiah figure has an advance man, an emissary or messenger who comes in and clears the way. Very often will deliver a teaching which will attune us with this Christ or Messiah figure. One of the missions of this peacemaker is to recover a piece of advanced technology and a spiritual teaching that is called the key of life. The Egyptians called it the Ankh. You may know of it as the caduceus. One of the people who had, in fact, the most to say about the return of the peacemaker and the recovery of the key of life in our time was the French prophet Nostradamus, who said that in July 1999, the king of terror would come out of the sky and resurrect the king of Anglemois. You can go to any video store across the world and rent a Nostradamus video, and they will invariably tell you that the king of terror is an asteroid or an alien invasion force that's going to come out of the sky and destroy the human race. Don't believe a word of that. Also, one of my forecasts is that the peacemaker will appear on the world stage between 1996 and 1999. Steven Spielberg has a movie coming out this year in which he portrays the peacemaker as a yahoo who tracks down black market nuclear materials. Don't be ridiculous and believe that either, because the peacemaker, this king of terror, is nothing less than the advance man of the Christ or Messiah. And I will be able to show you later on in my talk why Nostradamus called him the king of terror and the significance of his reappearance in our time, just a couple years away. Before I do that, I thought it might be helpful to share a little bit of my background with you. Before just about 6 months ago, I would have thought that my spiritual quest started late in life, but I recently discovered on my 34th birthday that my spiritual quest started out when I was very young. And the way that I learned that was on my birthday I had acquired a piece of moldavite. Some of you may be familiar with this gemstone quality meteorite that came to the earth millions of years ago and landed in an area of Czechoslovakia called Moldavia, hence it's called moldavite. It's thought to contain extraterrestrial frequencies. It came from outside of our solar system. Therefore, it's very different from anything that exists on this planet. The reason I was so excited about the acquisition of this chunk of moldavite was that one of the missions of the peacemaker is to recover a chunk of what is called the Emerald Tablet. Long, long ago, he had visited the indigenous peoples of the world, and he gave them each a tablet which contained a teaching with a life plan on it. And he said, as long as you follow this life plan, everything will continue to go your way. But if you diverge from the Creator's way, it's going to cause problems for you. And this peacemaker said to them, when I return, I will have this chunk of emerald tablet, and this will be my signature. This will help identify me to you. Well, in the course of my research, I kept pondering, where is he going to get this emerald tablet? Did he store it in the Hall of Records? Is it in Peru somewhere? Where could this possibly be? What does it represent? And with the acquisition of the Moldavite, I began to get a sense of what that is and the teaching it represents. I don't have time to go into that now, but I will tonight in my workshop. Well, I was very excited about this, and I took it home to my mother, and I said, "Mom, look what I got for my birthday." And I held it out to her, and she said, "Is that from Idaho?" And I said, "Mom, no. This is extraterrestrial. It's cosmic. It's very important." And she said, "Oh. Well, you have to understand that if you ask my mother, she will tell you that she is from a place called the Galaxy of Love. She's only visiting this planet temporarily. In fact, she's very bored. She spends a lot of her time watching CNN, politics, and if you ask her what we should do with most politicians, she will say, off with their heads." So when cosmic sort of things like I'm into are presented to her, they really don't faze her. But my curiosity was piqued, and I said, "Mom, why did you say Idaho?" And she said, "Well, don't you remember when you were 9, we took this trip out west. I grew up in Detroit, and when I was 9, my dad and mom packed me and my 2 sisters in the back of our Volkswagen station wagon, and we headed west. And the only thing that I distinctly remember about that trip is when we were rolling through the Rockies. We were in Jackson, Wyoming, up above the clouds, and my feet were propped up on the back window, and all of a sudden I watched my duffel bag full of my stuff go rolling down the Rockies. Now, this is a tremendous loss for a 9-year-old because you usually carry your favorite baseball mitt and all your possessions. And I was stripped of all my favorite stuff, and it was quite depressing. And she said, "No, not that." She said, "Don't you remember when we went to Idaho that we got into the middle of this meteorite field, and all of a sudden from the back of the car this booming voice said, 'Stop the car, now, Dad.'" And my parents kind of looked around in the back seat and saw their kid demanding that they stop the car. Well, my dad rolls over to the side of the road. I jump out, run into the middle of this meteorite field, and just sort of stand there. And they're like, my dad's like, "Well, it's your kid." And my mom's like, "No, he's your kid." So I don't remember that experience, but I do remember what happened later on was that our destination was Banff, Canada. And there, something occurred one night, and I woke up in a pool of blood. And I had a huge gash in the back of my head. No idea how it got there, probably sleptwalked. But the point is I later learned that was reputed to be the earthly home of the Archangel Michael. And the point of my telling this story is that as I look back now, I can see that there's conceivably a moment in your life that can go by us when we don't realize the significance of it. And certainly there must have been a connection with me in this meteorite field, and then later this Moldavite came along. And anyway, it's just something that happened. And it leads me to the next major spiritual unfoldment in my life, which occurred when I was 28. And here came my mom again this time. And this time she had an article in her hand. It was a Time magazine article from Ted Turner. And he said that science and technology can't solve the world's problems, contrary to what David Adair says. And he offered a big pile of money for writers of fiction who could deal with themes ensuring the survival and prosperity of all life on planet Earth. Up until that time, I had been a researcher for the Subliminal Research Foundation in Albuquerque, and I felt quite comfortable with dealing with these sorts of things because that's what we dealt with. And I decided to enter this contest. And it became perfectly obvious to me that while children are not the cause of Earth's problems, they certainly must be the solution. So what I proposed is, why don't we gather the children of the world together at a special place and allow them to put their heads together on a national and international basis and come up with solutions. If you talk to kids, they're full of bright ideas about how to make things better. Why don't we inspire them from the time they're this high, maybe 9 years old like I was, that they can make a difference in the world, and give them the tools. Let's bring David Adair in to teach them. Let's bring George Hansen in to teach them about integrity at these very young ages, and let them go back into their home world and teach what they've learned. Well, the idea was developing pretty well for me, and I needed some more inspiration for it. And one night I went to see one of Randy Winter's videos on the Pleiadians. And I will never forget coming home that night after seeing that video and having this expansive view of the cosmos. Some people propose that one way to do that is through acid or LSD, but I think other way to do it is just with a thought, to unlock consciousness by saying, look at all that is out there that you are part of. And it was a very extraordinary experience, and I want to personally thank Randy Winters for doing the work that he did to bring Billy Meyer's Pleiadian message to the world. because it deeply inspired me. Well, what I needed was a name for this place I wanted to gather these children at. And I distinctly remember standing out on the deck of my home overlooking this lake and looking up at the Pleiades and saying, look, would you help me? And I can't say for certain that this was the connection that I made, but all I know is that what happened was a word popped into my head, and that word was Tula, spelled T-U-L-A. And I immediately decided to call this place where I was going to gather these children Tula. Didn't seem to mean anything, sort of like Sony, a made-up name. So I had this place, I had a name for it, and now I needed a shape to exemplify this place. And at that time, I was writing in the dining room of my parents' home, and they had these 9-foot stained glass doors leading into the dining room, antiques. In fact, the whole house is architectural antiques reclaimed from churches around the world. There were 3 shapes on the door. They were a match set, so both doors had the same shape. And the middle shape was an egg with butterfly wings and a heart-shaped head. You can symbolize it just simply by drawing it this way. I said, that's it. Those are the 3 core concepts that will enable us, I believe, to make a quantum leap forward. The egg, the butterfly, the symbol of transcendence, and the heart, all connected, all linked up as one. I later learned that the other 2 shapes on these very special doors were significant. The top shape was the golden mean spiral upon which all ancient temple complexes were aligned. The bottom symbol was Mary Magdalene's personal crest. And that became very significant later in my story. But the point was, I now had Tula fully formed in my mind. It would be so massive, it would hang like a jewel from the earth. Hundreds of thousands of children could gather there at once. And it would be a symbol to those out there that we down here have our act together. It's a symbol of our unified will to survive. As long as children know Tula exists on the planet, that will give them hope in a sense that harmony can be achieved in our lifetimes. I didn't win the Turner Tomorrow Award. I became a gardener after that and had to kind of cool my brain down because it was quite an intensive experience. And I got back into research, and it wasn't but 6 months later that I learned that Tula actually existed at least twice before in human history in exactly the terms I described. The Mayans tell the story of their god of peace, Quetzalcoatl, who came among them with his builders and astronomers and architects and built a temple called Tula. And he told them that this was a symbol of their original homeland, which was lost in a cataclysm. And he said that the name of this homeland was Aztlan or Atlan, or it was called by its most sacred name, Tula. Now, Zecharia Sitchin has proposed that any time you see the letters T-L-A in any word, it is a significator of Tula. Aztlan. Atlantis is Tula. Atlanta, Georgia has the TLA significator letters in it as well, as does the name Nikola Tesla. Take out the E and the S and you're left with TLA, the significator letters of Tula. The second example of Tula in human history involved John the Baptist, the reputed forerunner of the Christ or Messiah, Jesus. After Herod had put out the call to murder all of the firstborn male children, he and his mother Elizabeth escaped into the desert. That beautiful holy book, the Quran, records that at that time, a splendorous cloud came out of the sky, landed. John the Baptist boarded this splendorous sky, or cloud, and it took off again. It took him to a place which was called Parwan, which means white mountain. The Mayans tell us that Tula means white mountain, and it is the pure place, the place of herons. And this term, place of herons, will become significant in a moment. When John was 22, according to the Quran, this splendorous cloud came back out of the sky, landed. John got out and began his ministry as the Peacemaker. Well, this was extraordinary to me, and it prompted me to start a Tula file of various researches that contained references to Tula in human history. And in my book, The Peacemaker and the Key of Life, I chronicle all of the various appearances of Tula throughout human history. Every major religion has its core at Tula. The New Jerusalem of the New Testament, the Mount Zion of the Hebrew tradition is Tula. Atala in the Mahabharata is Tula. There are numerous examples. Well, I sort of came to a dead end in my researches on Tula. Oh, you know, I taught at religious science churches or in various places with children, and I would draw the Tula symbol on the blackboard, and their imaginations would just absolutely fire when I told them I'm going to go get them $10 billion and we're going to build this place, but they get to build it. And we had just extraordinary times doing this. I wrote screenplays about it, but it just wasn't seemed to be happening because something was missing, and I didn't know what it was. Well, I abandoned the Tula concept, or I thought I did, and the thing that prompted me to abandon it was my first introduction to the Peacemaker. This introduction came when I learned of an Iroquois Indian named Daganoweda. His name means he who thinks. He lived in the year 1000 in upstate New York. Two things are significant about Daganoweda. One, in 1990, first of all, in the year 1000, he gathered together 5 fiercely antagonistic, in fact, cannibalistic tribes in upstate New York and put them together under something he called the Sacred or Great Tree of Peace, which was the first federal form of government on the planet Earth, or so they thought. The second thing that's important about this is that in 1990, President George Bush signed a resolution in Congress stating that the ideals for the United States Constitution came from the Great Tree of Peace. This seemed to uphold the notion held by at least several scholars that the founding fathers, Washington, Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin, secretly revered the Peacemaker as their true divine inspiration for the origin of America. Well, this was absolutely astonishing to me, having never heard of the Peacemaker before, or certainly never heard of Daganoweda. So I began investigating this figure. And I was led to the researches of a university professor by the name of Dr. Gregory Schaaf, who wrote a book called Wampum Belts and Peace Trees about an obscure American Indian agent named George Morgan. In 1976, of all years, he was given the personal papers, the letters of this George Morgan, which contained letters from Washington, Jefferson, and Franklin that were their personal correspondences concerning George Morgan's mission. In April of 1776, John Hancock, the then president of the Continental Congress, summoned George Morgan to the Congress. And he said, "George, we have a small problem. We're about to declare war on the British, but there's about 1 million Indians out here that if they side with the British, this holy undertaking, America, will not be born. And you're the guy that's going to go out and keep them neutral in this conflict." Well, George Morgan's response to them was, "You're nuts. I have a wife and 5 children. I'm a wealthy Philadelphia merchant. I can't lay my life on the line because if I go out and do this, the British will certainly kill me for being a traitor. And if they don't kill me, the Indians will kill me because I'm a Caucasian." Long story short, the only reason the American Indians remained neutral in the Revolutionary War conflict was because of the diplomacy of George Morgan. He rode out amongst them and talked with them about the Sacred Tree of Peace. What happened after the war is absolutely extraordinary. The Delaware Indians, who were members of this Iroquois Confederacy of Daganoweda, came to him and said, "Do you know who you are?" They conferred on him the title of the Peacemaker, and their shamans believed he was the reincarnated Daganoweda. The second thing that's significant about this is that after the war, the Spanish government ceded him 16 million acres of land, which he went and founded a utopian community based upon the ideals of the Peacemaker. That place is now New Madrid, Missouri. His utopian community was driven out of business within a year by the jealous local businessmen. But the point is this is absolutely extraordinary. And a concept came into my mind, which you may have already struck upon as you listened to me. Let us suppose that he was the reincarnated Peacemaker. He came in the year 1000 and planted this sacred tree of peace, a holy undertaking on the shores of this sacred land. He came back in 1776 as George Morgan, did the one thing one man can do to ensure that this great tree of peace would have a chance to live. He kept the Indians neutral in this conflict. Where I said, let us suppose that he is coming back in today's time when this tree of peace is certainly in jeopardy. Who would he be, and how would he know who he is? Well, I got a really lucky break in this search of mine because I had remembered an obscure footnote in Graham Hancock's book about the sign and the seal, his search for the lost Ark of the Covenant. In that, he said, isn't it just mysterious or odd that all of these great founding fathers or saviors somehow have a water motif in their mythology? Jesus walked on water. Moses parted the Red Sea. Sargon walked on water. Throughout history, there are all these great saviors or Messiah figures that are invariably associated with water. And what Graham Hancock proposed is that these are members of a brotherhood, a cult, that from time to time appear in human history to revive knowledge that was lost from the time before the flood, hence the save from water motif. Not only are they compassionate beings who have escaped the cycle of incarnation or an immortal, but they are also coming back to teach us what has been lost. What was fascinating about that was that I noticed that both Thoth and Moses carried a staff. And I did some research and I found out it's a little known fact, but in all of the catacombs underneath the city of Rome, in the original depictions of Jesus, whenever he's shown performing any of his miracles, he is staff in hand, raising Lazarus from the dead. And now this staff of miracles, this key of life, can be used to translate souls from one dimension to another. That's among its purposes. So I keyed on that staff as sort of a talisman that I could mark these figures with, but also the rescue from water. When I went back to Daganawita's story and asked him, were you ever rescued from water? The answer was, nope, not once. Twice. He was saved by angels from water. And this was a significant point to me, that there's no question that over this span of thousands of years that this water motif and these savior motifs include the same mythologies. Well, to make a kind of a long story short here, what I needed, if America is truly the peacemaker's sacred undertaking and something very extraordinary and special is to unfold on these lands, I needed a little bit of a symbol in America's mythology that would sort of affirm this. And if anybody cares to take the time to go to watch C-SPAN, in fact, and look in the rostrum of the United States Capitol, you will see the symbol of the United States Capitol, the United States Congress rather, is an exact replica of the Peacemaker's staff of miracles. And that to me was quite a profound discovery. What I want to do now is go back into the origins of the Peacemaker's cult and the Peacemaker's mystery. And I use the word cult hesitatingly. Brotherhood is perhaps better. And explore where these concepts came from and how they relate to Tula. Because what I discovered is what the Peacemaker does is recover the key of life, but he also gathers the children of light together at a very special place called Tula. And there is housed the teachings which will enable us to make a jump forward into a new golden age of learning. And this material is based on my book, The Peacemaker and the Key of Life, which I have available here. The story begins long ago with a man named Enoch, when he was roused from his sleep by a light so bright it frightened him. And what happened was, from out of this light appeared two beings, very tall, such as he had never seen before. And their eyes were big, and they were bright beings, and they shone like the sun. And they woke him up, and they said, Enoch, we got some work to do. And of course, I'm paraphrasing. And he's like, well, what? He's scared. And he feels for his wife, Sachet, who's asleep beside him. And they say, well, just wake her up. Tell her we're going to take you on a journey. We're going to bring you back, and everything's going to be just fine. So he does this. And these beings take him out of his home. He sees the whole of earth behind him. He travels through the seventh heaven to the central point in heaven. And there he receives a teaching, personal training from the Lord. And he is returned to earth with a magnificent teaching and concept of what he is supposed to do. And now he lived in the pre-flood civilization that we call Atlantis. And what I began to wonder is, why was Enoch chosen for this extraordinary message, or this extraordinary mission? A lot of scholars think it had something to do with one of the meanings of his name, Righteous One. However, when you look at the archetypal beats of the story of Enoch, a man who is roused from his sleep by a bright light and from beings that take him off to another world, where he receives a teaching that will advance his civilization, and he's returned and he delivers that teaching, is the story of a shaman. So Enoch was no ordinary man in my estimation. He was probably a highly trained initiate who either used sex, drugs, or music to induce this experience that he had. Well, the story of Enoch enlarges even further when it is realized that to the Greeks, or rather to the Egyptians, he was called by the name Thoth. Thoth is, in some instances, shown with this device here that my UPS man carries something like that. He calls it a notebook computer. Thoth called it, I'm sure, something different. But he was the guide of souls from this realm to the other realm. The Greeks called him by the name of Hermes. And they said he was a psychopomp. Again, a guide of souls from one realm to another. Hermes and Thoth both wielded the key of life. In the top picture, we see Hermes bringing souls from one dimension to another. In the middle is a shamanic drawing that goes back 30,000 years. The dove at the top of the staff in the lower left-hand corner will become significant, as will the bird atop the caduceus in the very bottom illustration, which is also a variation of the key of life. So the Greeks called him Hermes. The Egyptians called Enoch by the name Thoth. The Hebrews called him Enoch. And what is so fascinating about this is that the Hebrews also recorded that Enoch, Thoth, is the same person as not only Seth in the Bible, but also Elijah. And what's astonishing about this is that when Jesus came along and they asked him who Elijah was, or rather they asked him who John the Baptist was, he identified him as the reincarnated Elijah, which potentially explains why Enoch was roused from his sleep all those years ago. If he indeed were all of these people, the reason he was picked up from his bed is because he is the peacemaker, the forerunner or messenger of the Christ or Messiah. And he was picked up at that time to receive a teaching. Well, the question that entered my mind was, there are a lot of people, many in this room likely, that have had a near-death experience in which they encounter a bright light, and they are taken to an otherworldly place. Is it possible that people today go to the same place as did Enoch all those eons ago? If so, where is that place? If you ask the Mayans and the Egyptians and the Atlanteans, they will tell you that that place is called Tula. It is the central point in heaven, the place from whence our souls originated. This is the plan of the Milky Way galaxy. Earth is way out here on the Orion arm of the Milky Way galaxy. Tula presumably inhabits the central point, the galactic core, the central spiritual sun, which physicists now propose is inhabited by a white hole, a gusher of cosmic matter. Through our modern Tower of Babel, the Hubble Space Telescope, we have been able to see out into the garden. And we now know that there are 50 billion, at least, such galaxies in our universe. Theoretically, every one of those also has a central spiritual sun, just like ours. In every religious tradition, Tula is the central place in heaven from whence our souls originated. At Tula is a fountain, a wellspring of souls, and they fanned out like 4 rivers. This is recorded in the story in the book of Genesis. It appears in every single mythology on the planet, this exact same story. And it is symbolized by the enclosed sun cross, the symbol of wholeness. But that's just one of the symbols of Tula in our relationship with Tula. The key of life is the means to return to Tula. It is a spiritual teaching which, once apprehended, will enable our soul to attune itself with the energies of Tula and return home. It is fascinating to me that this is the Ankh, the Egyptian symbol for the key of life. When you push up the equal arm of the cross into the circle of the key of life, you get the exact same symbol of Tula, the enclosed sun cross. Another symbol of our relationship with Tula are these symbols here. They're probably the most familiar to you as the Chinese yin-yang symbol, the Mayan Hunab Ku symbol, and the Navajo symbol. And on a microcosmic or earthly level, these represent the balances of male and female, light and dark, so forth. What they represent on the cosmic level is something entirely different, however. According to the Mayans in particular, they say that our solar system makes a 26,000-year cosmic journey around the central spiritual sun, or Tula. These symbols symbolize that 26,000-year period. They're sort of like merry-go-rounds, where souls leave the central point in heaven, or Tula, and jump on the earth ride, and this spins around for 26,000 years. It so happens one of these cosmic cycles comes to a close in December 2012, at which time I propose it will be an excellent time for souls wanting to return home to make a mass evacuation of the planet. Perhaps many will return to Tula. Perhaps others will return to any of the billions of inhabited planets within our galaxy, our Milky Way galaxy. Those are sort of like choosing between a Ferris wheel over here and a merry-go-round over here. Earth I'm describing as a merry-go-round. Throughout history, Tula complexes have been constructed. This is a map from J.J. Hertog's book, The Keys of Enoch, in which he correctly identifies each of these areas. He doesn't call them Tula complexes, which is interesting to me that he's channeling Enoch, but he didn't get the central core of Enoch's message. But all of these are Tula complexes, and how I know that is that he identifies the Great Pyramid as the heart of the Tula complex on Earth. It's like a pacemaker. He is the only person I have ever seen to properly show how the pyramid is to be viewed as a tetrahedron. It's to be viewed as if you're looking up into it, not from a flat plane. Well, over here is Atlantis. This right there is Rennes-le-Château, France. This is Mongolia over here. Nostradamus said the Peacemaker is going to resurrect the king of Anglemois. This is the king of Mongolia, where one of the original Tula complexes was erected on Earth. We have the Philippines over here. We have Hawaii over here. Each time the Tula complexes are constructed, enormous amounts of gold are required, because what they're going to do is create a golden needle to bind the two worlds together, the two dimensions. The word Tula means balance in Sanskrit. It means what binds to the Mayans. It's a temple that binds earth to heaven, to the central heaven, or central Tula in heaven. All of these places are known as enormous repositories of gold. Let's take the Philippines. Ferdinand Marcos came to power because he was able to discover the original Japanese cache of gold, and he used that as leverage to come to power. This is Oak Island, Nova Scotia up here, where is rumored to be billions of dollars worth of gold that was mysteriously placed there. FDR once owned shares in a mining company that was attempting to pull that out. Rennes-le-Château, France. The Templars are always connected with the gold that was removed from Jerusalem to this site in France, in Rennes-le-Château. He shows two areas that are hot in this diagram, which he says are the two areas where the matings of the worlds are going to occur. These are the new Tula complexes. One of them is located in Lexington, Kentucky, which, if it's not full of cocaine by now, it's full of gold. This is Pueblo, Colorado, the other location. I was recently in Colorado, and they tell me there that there's Egyptian hieroglyphs all over the place out there, and these speak of legends of gold that was removed there. There are pyramid complexes in the Grand Canyon. If you'd like to read about it, you can look in David Hatcher Childress's material, and it's very well documented that the Egyptians had a presence in this part of the world. Well, these Tula complexes move like a train across a track, or like a necklace, depending upon where Earth is, conceivably in relation to Tula. Earth is on her own spiral of ascension, as is Tula. From time to time, they become askew like this. And what the Mayans told us, and let me show you this right quick first. Oh, raise it, okay. The symbol for the Tula complexes is the butterfly, or the Star of David. The Star of David morphs into the butterfly. They're interchangeable symbols. This is an Atlantean figure from the Tula complex in Mexico, and he's got a butterfly on his chest. These are all symbols for what binds. This one right here you might identify with Jesus as the symbol for the fish. Wrong. It predates Jesus by millennia. It is the Egyptian symbol for the heron. What the Egyptians said is that at the dawn of each new age, the heron comes out of the central spiritual sun and lands on top of the pyramid, and from its outstretched arms radiates light, and then delivers a teaching which will enable us to transform ourselves into herons. Now, this isn't to transform ourselves into birds. It is to transform ourselves into beings of light, capable of absorbing Christ's consciousness and uplifting the spiritual vibration of a planet and returning home to the central point in heaven, if that is our desire. What they said is that there is a group of souls that go along with the heron, and the Hebrews call them the tikkun olam. This loosely translates to planetary healers. These planetary healers are a higher vibrational soul that inhabit the bodies of human, and what their goal is to do is to act as lights, to lead others to the way towards the tree of life where the Messiah is waiting and who will take them into the promised land, or Tula. And what they left us was a group, or one particular body posture which acts as an antenna. The body posture is called the return of the heron, and it looks like this. What is occurring here, how many have heard of Greg Braden and his work? What Greg says is that the spiritual vibration of the earth is lifting right now. This spiritual vibration, he says, comes from the central spiritual sun, which I identified as Tula. Comes through the sun, through the core of the earth, and is absorbed upward through the earth. We are to become flowers or flowers of this energy. This is the body posture right here that will enable us to do this. This goddess figure is absorbing the energy. This symbol here is the symbol for the central spiritual sun, or Tula. She has an angel here and an angel here, and as I will show you, these symbols are consistent throughout the ages. If we went to the temple of Dendera, or rather, if we lived in Lemuria in 72,000 BC, we would have perhaps looked at this drawing here, which I realize is very difficult to see, but what it shows is 9 planes of existence. The Lemurians and the Hindus also believe that there are 9 planes of existence. So do the Hopi. The Hopi Indians say that we are leaving the 5th world right now and entering the 6th world. This will be a time when our thoughts, prayers, desires, and actions all become one. We have instant manifestation at our fingertips. Only love can exist in this 6th world. I was at Estes Park a couple of months ago where the grandmothers believe that they shut the door on the 5th world and we have opened the door on the 6th, which means these higher spiritual vibrations will begin inundating the planet. And I believe we're to become flowers of those energies through this body posture. We can see these 9 planes of existence, and each one of these people are in the exact return of the heron body posture. If we went to the temple of Dendera in Egypt in 26,000 BC and looked up on the ceiling, as would have been customary, we would have seen this world's oldest zodiac, the world's oldest cycle of time. Each of these goddess figures is in the return of the heron body posture. They're not upholding a zodiac, they're upholding a world. What the Hopi conception of a world was is identical. This is Atlas, the first priest king of Atlantis, and I believe the first peacemaker on earth. Atlas is upholding the world. He's not upholding the world, he's upholding the Word, the life energy upon which the world is built. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the life energy upon which earth was constructed. Atlas, as the peacemaker, delivered a teaching which will enable us to uphold this Word, this life energy, to flow it through us and bring it into the thought sphere of the planet to correct any imbalances. The Mayans told us that Quetzalcoatl, their god of peace, and Atlas were the same guy. Whether a reincarnation or the exact same individual is not clear. However, Quetzalcoatl is shown upholding the Mayan symbol for heaven, for the world. Okay? It's the exact same body posture. Now, we're going across time at least 10,000 years now, likely much longer than that. The Egyptian goddess cultures upheld the body posture as significant and recorded it profusely. Indeed, they said that these energies from Tula are female. This is an extraordinary diagram, which I will explore in detail in my workshop. You won't believe what it actually represents if I told you. Well, it's a soul sphere. It's the higher vibrational souls that came to Earth to raise the souls of the cataclysmic destruction of Tiamat. Half of it became the asteroid belt, the other half became Earth. And these souls came to rescue the earthbound souls from that Holocaust. Jesus modeled the body posture. He, like the Egyptian goddess of millennia before his time, he came as the heron to tie the worlds together, and he was going to use his golden needle to build a temple in Jerusalem. It never got built. It was built in Rennes-le-Château, France, as a 21 or 40 square mile flower of life. But what's significant about this is you have an angel here and an angel here. You have the sun and the moon, which are the symbols for balance. Jesus is holding this energy up and giving it to himself, exactly the same way all of the previous goddess figures I showed were doing. It's because what he's doing, he said, I went to clear a way before you. He's giving us this life energy that we might create a new world, a new thought sphere, a new soul sphere for the planet. This is a crop circle, which shows the old Earth and a new Earth unfolded or unfolding from within it, with a person in the return of the heron body posture on top of this new world. This is the Trishulin of the Hindu tradition. It's the same as the trident, which is a model of the body posture again. It's the Hindu version of the key of life. And that word Trishulin, again, has the TLA significator letters of Tula written right in it. Moses, I said, possessed the key of life. He used it to part the Red Sea. And in his battles with the Israelites, there's that story where he has one brother upholding one arm and another one upholding this arm. What body posture do you suppose that makes him standing in? He used this body posture to channel the Holy Spirit through himself. And this is the power that enabled him to use the key of life, to wield that power. The point is, the key of life, as pointed out by Zecharia Sitchin, is made from a branch that grew on the tree of life. The tree of life, of course, was planted in the Garden of Eden. God gave, having compassion for Adam, gave him the key of life. He passed it on down to Seth, who passed it down to Enoch, who passed it to Noah, who passed it on down to Abraham. It was later acquired by Moses when it rested in Egypt, and then Jesus later acquired it. I thought it might be interesting for you to see what the device was that this tree of life, an advanced physical technology, this is a staff, it is an actual device that came from another device called the tree of life, which is this right here, an approximate 30-story construction that is based on an Ark of the Covenant, which is a device used to translate souls from one dimension to another. This is the central pillar. Did you know that in the Bible the word cross wasn't used until the year 500-600? The original word was pillar. And it's my sense that what Jesus did was use this pillar to remove himself from the earth and travel to the central point in heaven. And I'll tell you the story that encodes that in a moment. I just wanted you to see that what the key of life is a remote control, in effect, for the tree of life, which is a much more magnificent device, which was likely buried underground at Abydos, Egypt. What it was used to do was to bring a soul sphere to earth. In Hebrew, the same word for serpent is the same word for soul. It's also the same word for brass and electricity. And what the Hebrews tell us is that outside of the Holy of Holies of the temple is a sea of brass. Well, if we look at these temples, as did the ancients, as replicas of the female body, then what they're saying is outside of the Holy of Holies, the womb, is a sea of brass, serpents, electricities, or souls. Okay? So what happens is we have to find some way to document this. And I believe that this picture documents the use of the tree of life as a device for bringing a soul sphere to earth. If outside of the sea outside of the temple is a sea of brass, can it also mean that outside of the womb of the earth is a sea of souls, a literal soul atmosphere? And that what happens at the point of death is that we either stay earthbound and reincarnate, or we find the light that will return us home. And that is the bridge that Jesus and other teachers have come to build. What I want to get into now is to return to Nostradamus, which is what I thought I came here to talk about. I got sidetracked. And in order to do that, I think we have to go back to this picture here. Because what this picture encodes is something very, very dramatic. And the key to it is this expression here. You can't probably read it, but it says INRI, I-N-R-I. And for eons, we've been told in church that what this means is Jesus the Nazarene, King of the Jews. Pontius Pilate nailed this on the pillar and said that this stated Jesus' crime, and it also told who he was. Well, there's an esoteric meaning for everything that's in the Bible. And what the esotericists said, what the wisdom keeper said, is what this expression actually means is by fire, nature is renewed whole. By fire, humanity is made new. Now, in our time, we have a tendency to want to look at fire as having to do with nuclear destruction. But can't fire also have the meaning of frequency or vibration? And can we interpret this as saying by a new vibration, by fire, humanity will be made new, will be uplifted, okay? Well, here's where this becomes so significant, is because in one of his quatrains, Nostradamus did say that in July of 1999, the King of Terror will come out of the sky and resurrect the King of Anglemois. And the reason that he called his Peacemaker the King of Terror is this. In his early incarnation as Enoch or Thoth, when he went to heaven and came back with that teaching, what he had was a pattern for a Tula complex that was to be constructed, and that pattern was the tetrahedron. And that pattern was constructed into the millions of tons of stone that became the Great Pyramid complex in Giza. Thoth and his wife Seshet at that time went around the planet gathering all the most sacred teachings and advanced technology of all those pre-flood civilizations. They placed him in something called the Hall of Records, marked this repository with the Sphinx, which is a composite beast of the lion, bull, man, and eagle, which have enormous correspondences, which I won't go into detail now, except to point out that these four beasts also correspond with 4 ages that will lead to quantum leaps into golden ages of learning for humanity. We are entering one of them right now, the age of Aquarius, the man. In the Arab tradition, the Sphinx is called the father of terror because of its role as a significator of change. Given that there, I can draw a direct line in my mind between the King of Terror of Nostradamus and the father of terror, this Peacemaker who originally constructed this Hall of Records. But that may not be good enough for each of you. So I kept digging, and what I discovered was that terror, at least in southern France where Nostradamus grew up, was always associated with enlightenment. Nostradamus assuredly knew the story of the origins of the Holy Grail, where a young Frenchman was having breakfast one morning and what is described as a beautiful young man appeared to him and said, "I would like to tell you a story." And the young Frenchman says, "Well, all right." And this beautiful young man says, "But first I need to blow in your face so that I can increase your vision by 100 times. This he does. And this young Frenchman is all of a sudden struck with the realization that the beautiful young man standing in front of him is none other than Jesus. Furthermore, he has a ball of light so bright in his hands it frightens him. It terrorizes him. And Jesus says to this young Frenchman, "I would like for you to help me write my book right now. And here's how this book goes." The title of the book is Here Commences the Holy Grail. And the first chapter of this book is Here Commences Terror. So from this point forward, at least in southern France, Jesus and terror became associated. And terror became furthermore associated with enlightenment. This interesting story goes on to describe a journey down 7 roads, which I directly correspond with the 7 stars of the Pleiades, which takes them to the central point in heaven where they come upon a fountain, which to me is a symbol of the fountain of souls from whence we came. According to the Mayans and the Egyptians and a lot of other traditions, the Pleiades are the stargate to the central point in heaven. They're simply the most direct route. You can probably get there through Sirius. You can probably get through Orion, if you like, as well. However, the Pleiades appears to be the method at that time that Jesus decided to use. And the proof that he used that is in the story of his curing of Mary Magdalene by 7 demons. Church fathers present Mary Magdalene basically as a ne'er-do-well slut. The word Magdala, from whence she derives her name, means tower of the flock, and was symbolized by a dove. The dove always being the symbol in ancient times of the Pleiades, or the heron, these angels that come to lead the way back home. Jesus cured her, and anytime he was doing this attunement that he did on Mary Magdalene, he blew on these subjects. He didn't use his wand, and he didn't touch them. He blew on them. And if anyone has ever had a Tibetan Reiki attunement, the way that you receive these symbols is by having them blown into your auric field. Well, the story continues, and Mary Magdalene is the key to all of this mystery. And what happens in the book of John is this. She goes, and I'm going to paraphrase this, obviously. She goes to the tomb on Easter morning. And by the way, the Easter is named after Esther, one of the northern names for Inanna, or Astarte, who is the queen of heaven, the queen of the central point in heaven, and has all kinds of connections with not only Sirius, but the Pleiades. And what happens is Mary Magdalene goes into the tomb and she sees that it's empty. And she sees these two guys sitting there who she thinks are angels. And she says, "Gentlemen, if you'll tell me what you've done with Jesus' body, I'll be happy to take care of it." And at that point, she turns around and she sees a man walking towards her. She runs up to him and she identifies him in the book of John as the gardener. And she says, "Sir, if you will tell me where Jesus' body is, I'll be happy to take care of it." This gardener says, "Mary, hello, it's me, Jesus." Well, now what's up with this? How is it that Mary Magdalene, who is described as his chief apostle, is one of his best friends and a close companion, could mistake him for the gardener? Was he in disguise? Was his face mutilated from the crucifixion? Is there some other explanation? Maybe he's in his Merkaba vehicle, his body of light. Who knows? But none of those answers are satisfactory to me. So I went digging to find out who this gardener was. Now, when I say to you, the Terminator, an instant picture develops in your mind. You think of both actor Arnold Schwarzenegger and an archetypal figure in a movie. When I say Superman, you think of Christopher Reeve, an actor, and you also think of an archetypal figure of a shapeshifter. I believe that when the book of John was constructed, that they knew exactly who the gardener was, and all they had to do was say the gardener was there that morning, and everybody would say, "Oh yeah, him." We have lost, I believe, identification of who the gardener is. Well, I went looking, and would you be surprised to find out that mythologically the gardener is someone called the green man, who is shown with vegetation symbolizing the word of God coming from his mouth. The gardener, according to the Greeks who were expert record keepers, is none other than the king of Tula. So can we possibly conclude, and by the way, not only that, but when you track all the appearances as recorded by the Islamic people and others, the gardener was John the Baptist. What does this mean? I'll leave it up to each of you to offer your own interpretation, but what I think happened is that Jesus was in cahoots with Mary Magdalene, working on a means to attune souls with the Stargate of the Pleiades, and that what he would do would show them how to do that. And Mary Magdalene, being from Missouri, said, "Well, show me." And he said, "Fine. What would you like me to bring back, the king of Tula?" And she said, "Yeah, bring back the king of Tula." So I think during the time in between the crucifixion and resurrection, Jesus hightailed it back to Tula, came back with the only proof that would satisfy Mary Magdalene that his method of ascension and resurrection worked. He brought back the gardener. The Cathars were an immensely beautiful people that lived in southwestern France around the year 1100 or so. There was a huge population of them. Their name means pure ones, but they were named after Catherine. She was the dancer at the fiery wheel at the central point in heaven, which is called Tula. And whether this fiery wheel is some kind of strip joint or something, I don't know, but she danced there. And what I suspect is that she came to Earth and inspired these Cathars, and I've got the story of how she came to Earth. It's quite fascinating. You can tell it in the workshop if you like. But anyway, these Cathars were Christians, but they weren't your typical Christians because they didn't believe in a lone Savior. They believed that all of us were potential Christed beings, and they believed that they had the teaching, the core teaching, that would enable them to become Christed beings. You know what? They only had one book of the Bible. And would you be surprised that it was the book of John, the only gospel to record the story of the gardener? Well, you have these Cathars running around southwestern France doing all these miraculous things. And if you take the Indian and Hindu and Buddhist yogis' words for it, they could apparently levitate, they could make themselves as big as they wanted, as small as they wanted, they had all these immense abilities. Well, Pope Innocent III didn't quite like what they were doing. And in fact, he got so upset one morning that he sent 30,000 stormtroopers into that area and exterminated every single man, woman, and child in that community until this teaching was eradicated from the face of the earth, or so he thought. Well, is there any reason to speculate why, when Nostradamus came along just a few hundred years later, and he's a Hebrew initiate, schooled in all the Egyptian mysteries, because that's where the Hebrews got all their stuff from, that he would, if he had an inclination of this returning peacemaker, that he would call him anything but a name that would distract the majority of the church from knowing the true meaning of who this person is. And this is why I believe he called his peacemaker the King of Terror. Because to Nostradamus, if you became an enlightened being, you were marked for extermination. And this was a terrorizing thought to him. And so he needed some way to disguise this figure. And this is why he called him the King of Terror. And the reason that he called him the King of Anglemois, the person that this King of Terror will resurrect, is because Anglemois, or Mongolia, was the site of one of the original Tula complexes on Earth. That may be a little slim to some, but that's the best I can do for that explanation. Jesus went to Mongolia, though. He was raised, of course, in the area of Palestine. But we know during those missing years that he took all these journeys and had these extraordinary teachings given to him. And one of those teachings was given at a place called Taxila, which was a Buddhist enclave, a sort of library of Alexandria that still exists. And this is where the Buddhist masters were giving most of their teachings. And of course, the word Taxila has the TLA significator letters of Tula built right in it. The other thing that's fascinating about Jesus is that if he were a Buddhist, there's probably no question that he would have risen to the level of what the Buddhists call tulku. Now, a tulku means compassionate one, and out of extraordinary compassion for the human race, these beings who otherwise have crossed the waters of immortality have returned to this plane to deliver teachings which will enable us to identify where we're to go. Well, it's fascinating to me that if you were a tulku, that you can decode these words. They're all Kabbalistic, at least I think they are, and that they're all word plays and puns. If Jesus were a tulku, isn't it interesting that the first three letters of the word tulku are T-U-L, which certainly could be significators of Tula. Ku is, in any tradition you look up, a word that means God, or shining, or effervescent one. Could tulku then mean shining one of Tula? And this is what Jesus was here to do. The word that we use for Jesus is carpenter. It's not the correct word. The original word that was used to describe Jesus was tekton, a word that means bridge builder or construction engineer. And it's my sense that Jesus was here to build a bridge from Earth to Tula. And that when these figures return today, in July of 1999, that's exactly what they do. My work dovetails with Zecharia Sitchin because I believe, and I've proven in my new book, which will be out next year, The Gardener in the Tree of Life, that the gardener was none other than the figure Zecharia Sitchin identifies as Anki. He was also Osiris, the only figure in the Egyptian pantheon of gods who was painted green. And this figure continuously reappears and has these teachings. Very quickly, I only have a few minutes, I believe Hale-Bopp is connected with this because Hale-Bopp makes a 5,900-year orbit. The last time Hale-Bopp showed up, a being who is called the Anu, the state ruler of Nibiru, the planet from where these folks are thought to have originated, came down and had dinner and left. But Thoth, who was on the planet at that time, also received a teaching which he gave to the Mayans and the Egyptians and others, which came presumably from the beings that originated from this comet. So I've kind of like gone way far afield, but I want to leave you with one thought. Nostradamus called the name of the returning peacemaker by the name of Chiron, a Sanskrit word that means divine offering. There are numerous scholars that say, well, it's not actually Chiron or Chiron, but what Chiron is an anagram for a person, or I believe a thing, called well, actually, what I'll tell you is that the decoders say that this name of this person is Heinrich or Henry. I draw a direct line between this thing, Henry, and Inri, this expression here. Because when I was in Colorado last, I went out to NOAA in Boulder, and they tell me that between July 1999 and January 2000, a billion-ton gaseous bomb will come out of the sun and strike the Earth. They're not sure what the ultimate result of this is going to be. If you have your computers or anything else turned on, they're going to be toast. That's one result of this. But if you don't have them turned on, you're going to be fine. I interpret this gaseous bomb as a spiritual ejection, a higher spiritual frequency that emanated from the central spiritual sun that will come through our sun and is to be absorbed upward through the earth. And this corresponds directly with the return of Nostradamus' King of Terror. So now, unless there's any questions, I will wrap up.
That's it. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, William.
Audience.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. Okay, please hold your seats for a moment.